half hour today with a lot of material to cover, but we'll hopefully get through that and have some time for questions and answers. I'm Kim Coble. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, and I'm really happy to present this report to you today. We actually are an organization of three organizations. We're comprised of three organizations, and we have three main elements. Our first is Gene Karpinski, who's the president of the National LCV, has this great statement about when our friends are elected, great things happen. And so we work very hard to get good, strong conservation people elected. We do that by working in the elections and through endorsements. That's a big part of what we do every 4 years in Maryland. Once they're elected, we work with them to get strong policies through, and we work through advocacy, we lobby, we work with many of you so members are hearing from their constituents and they know what people that are electing them and voting for them really want when it comes to the environment. And then the third thing we do is we hold them accountable. And we do an annual environmental scorecard of the Maryland General Assembly that will be coming out in September for this past session. The other thing we do is we look at how the governor's doing, and we worked very hard to get Governor Moore elected. We are now holding him accountable for some of the things that he said during the campaign and also the actions he's done over the first 6 months. So you can see on the slide there that we have a C3, which is our education element aspect. We have our C4, which is our political and lobbying work. And then we have a political action committee, which is our election work. So lots of actions going on and activities here at Maryland LCV. And with that, go ahead to the next slide, please. So as I said, we're holding Governor Moore accountable. In June of 2022, when Governor Moore was a candidate, he issued a report pledging 8 actions that he would take in the first 100 days relative to climate change. We stood at the podium and at the press conference with him when those pledges were made. And what we have done in the first look and next steps report is to take a look at all of those 8 pledges and said, how has he done during that time? How has his administration functioned? And also where we want him to be going in the next steps. We also looked at his appointments, and in the report, we looked at his appointments, and we also looked at key pieces of legislation that he signed and or worked on hard to get passed. That summary is in that report, and I am not going to go through all of that with you today. The upshot is that we feel like he's making great progress in a short time period. That's the upshot. There are areas we want to focus on and make sure that there's some improvements and some acceleration of efforts. I'll talk about those. But overall, we're very pleased with how well Governor Moore and the whole Moore-Miller administration is doing on the environment, and how it's a priority for them. Their appointments have been strong, their actions have been strong, and there's been great accessibility with the administration. So we're really pleased with that. So what I'm going to talk about today is, of those 8 commitments or pledges that he gave during the while he was a candidate, we're going to focus on 5. The 3 we're not going to focus on has to do with staffing and partnerships, and you can see how we our comments in the report on that. What I'm going to focus on are the 5 actions that specifically deal with pollution reduction. And so with that, let's go ahead to the first slide on this. One of the big commitments that Governor Moore made was to begin the transition to 100% clean electricity and build a clean energy workforce. We were really pleased with this pledge that he has made, and you can see in this first slide the assessment of his progress. For each of these, we're going to have a slide that has progress, and we're going to have a slide on recommendations. Real quickly, 100% clean energy. He stood at a podium in March, I believe it was, and called for 8.5 gigawatts of offshore wind, which is huge. We're at 2 right now. He signed and supported making the community solar program permanent. That was some legislation. And he created a task force to examine both tax and non-tax incentives for solar deployment, which are really key to advancing and accelerating solar deployment. So really great progress this session and in the first 6 months of his administration on clean energy. Next slide, please. However, where our recommendations are is that we believe that there is a need for some real executive leadership on this 100% clean energy. And we're looking for this to be developed over the next 6 months or so. That executive leadership is to help further deploy renewable energy. We also believe that significant investments have to be identified and acquired. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a future slide, but really important to find some revenue sources for this clean energy. And then, as I said, to accelerate renewable energy deployment, both in terms of siting of storage facilities, solar facilities, and permitting. These are the areas that we believe there needs to be an acceleration. Next slide, please. Aggressively fight to reduce transportation emissions, which is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland. Great progress this year. I was very honored to stand with him at the podium when he announced that Maryland was going to adopt the Clean Cars 2 approach, which is to have 100% of the new electric vehicles 100% of new vehicles be electric by 2035. Really pleased about that. And also that we're going to increase the amount of electric, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles, including school buses. These are great advancements. And we were super excited to see that he relaunched and expedited the Baltimore Red Line. So great progress in the transportation arena. Next slide, please. Again, revenues. So we have a requirement that school buses need to be electric by 2025. Any new school buses being purchased after 2025 need to be electric. School districts need help with that. There's an additional costs up front for those electric school buses. Over time, they will cost less, but the initial upfront cost needs to be supported and subsidized by the state or including the federal funding that's available. We want to incentivize EV purchasing and build better EV infrastructure. That is really critical. And there's been some advancements in that from the federal appropriations as well. Improve and establish new public transportation. Really happy to see that with the red line there, but there's others. The Southern Maryland transit line needs to be updated and improved and, well, frankly, established and improved. The other one is having to do with data, and we want to have the quality, accuracy, and accessibility of real-time data for transit services available. This will make the whole transit system far more effective, and we're hoping that's something that the administration will prioritize in the next short time period. Next slide. The third commitment that he made in his when he was a candidate and had the 8 points that the third one that we're focusing on is to aggressively protect the Chesapeake Bay and improve Maryland's waterways. The progress has been good. There was budget that was included, so there's more staffing available for the agencies. We were really surprised, frankly, to see how the agencies had suffered quite a bit. They had lost staff and lost infrastructure and really needed to be rebuilt. Fortunately, this has been a top priority of the administration. We're really pleased to see that. The governor also signed the Forest Conservation Act, which was a 7-year bill in the making. We've been at this for a long time with our partners and really happy to see that bill pass. It's very strong. And the governor signed that. And also there were several policies to advance water quality that came through the General Assembly. So really explicitly happy about that. And the administration is working on attacking invasive species, which is a threat to the bay and the waterways. So good progress on waterways. Next slide. Recommendations. This is another area where executive leadership is needed. There's needs to be a new Chesapeake Bay Agreement. The old one expires in 2025, and it's been admitted that we're not going to make it. The goals that were set out in that Chesapeake Bay Agreement are going to be missed. And so a new one has to be drafted, and it has to be different. It has to be aggressive, but also getting really targeted approaches to these actions, pollution reduction actions. We believe the governor has an opportunity to provide some excellent executive leadership in the cleanup and the draft of the bay, as well as the drafting of the new Bay Agreement. We also believe funds and practices have to be targeted. There's not enough money for everything, for everyone to get access to funding. It has to be targeted by geography as well as practice. What are the most effective places and practices that need to get funds, and the target, and we have to target funds in that direction. And the Maryland Department of Agriculture has to continue to promote the transition to sustainable ag practices. Our farmers we need them, we want them, but we want them operating so that in a sustainable manner for water quality. So those are our recommendations moving forward. Next slide, please. Prioritize environmental justice funding to overburden and underserved communities. We were really, really pleased to see the terms underserved and overburdened to be codified. So in law, those two terms are now defined, and we were really pleased to see that. Now comes the actions that are needed to really prioritize protecting and restoring these communities. So good progress in that area. There were 2 bills that were signed and which prioritized funding for those kind of communities, for the overburdened, underserved communities, the Energy and Transportation Act and the Transportation Equity Act. So very pleased with that. Our recommendations in this area are as follows, though. And next slide. We're asking the administration to issue an executive order that would direct every state agency to develop and track progress on an environmental justice plan for the agency. We believe that kind of real prioritization and reflection that the agencies can do is critical. There's President Biden has come up with the term Justice 40, which says that 40% of funds need to be allocated to these overburdened, underserved communities. We believe Maryland needs to implement this approach as well, and we're calling on them to implement funding in these communities. There's a good screening and mapping tools. These need to be continually to be invested in and refined, and then utilized by the agencies and by and made publicly available as well. So we are calling on them to continue that work to really develop the screening and mapping tools. And lastly, the term cumulative impacts, you've probably heard us talk about over the years, but when you look at these overburdened, underserved communities, they have many impacts from pollution. It's air pollution, it's water pollution, it's transportation that's driving down streets, it's a lack of good, healthy food systems that are accessible to them. There's transportation inaccessibility. Where's the transit located near them? Are there charging structures for EVs, et cetera, et cetera? And we, as a state, over years have developed an assessment that is one sector at a time. So if a permit is being issued for an industry, only that permit is being evaluated instead of the cumulative impacts that's on an overburdened or underserved community. We're asking that the administration really start to assess and address the cumulative impacts that are in the overburdened and underserved communities. So that's a top priority as well. And our last one is probably the one with the biggest list of recommendations, is to maximize state capacity by aggressively competing for every available federal, public, and private dollar. The administration has created a federal investment team, which is point people from each agency that are tasked with identifying and applying for federal funds. Very pleased to see this. However, we believe there's an urgency that needs to be applied to these applications and to identifying them. So our recommendations in this area are as follows. We want to maximize the unprecedented funding opportunities at the federal level. It's unfathomable how much money is available for states. And we as a state need to organize and have one point person. We believe the chief sustainability officer, that's what CSO is, it should be that person. They need to strengthen the partnerships at the federal, state, local levels, nonprofits, and target the ability to obtain funds. Where's the best funding source? Who is it in the federal government that's allocating them? And how do we access that? And there's just got to be a much, much more concerted effort to obtain those funds. We need to educate local governments, that's what LG stands for, and Marylanders about these funding sources. There's funding that's available for Marylanders for incentives for EV purchasing. Does everybody understand that and know about that? Are local governments familiar with the grant applications that they can make? We need to make sure that's happening. Also develop partnerships, again, especially in underserved, overburdened communities, to make sure that those funds are going to the most needed communities. And that needs to be a priority. Most importantly, we believe, well, secondarily to increasing the effort, is to develop a public portal so that we can all track what the state's doing in terms of applying for and obtaining these funds, as well as then once they're obtained, deploying them. And we need full transparency on this. The administration can do a great job in making sure we can hold them accountable and we can help them. But the more we know, the more we can assist them with that effort. So we really believe that is important. So real quickly, that was the top line 5 commitments that we wanted to highlight for you and our recommendations on what the administration can do. Again, overall, really pleased on the 6 months effort. Real quickly, we believe a whole government approach needs to be done, and we're pleased that the administration is really working so collectively amongst the agencies and themselves. A comprehensive investment strategy, just talked about that. 100% clean energy by 2035 is the rallying cry that we all need to be saying moving forward. That goal is critical, and deploying renewables is critical. We passed a great bill 2 years ago, the Climate Solutions Now Act, most aggressive emission reduction goals in the country. That has to get implemented, and we're fortunate that MDE has prioritized that, issued a pathway report looking for public input. Stay tuned. We'll be talking more about that at another event here coming up. And of course, environmental justice remains a top priority. But climate will not be cleaned. We can't address climate change unless we address the injustices around climate change and other pollution sources as well. So those are the big ticket items that we are prioritizing moving forward. So with that, oh yes, thank you. So this is what you can do, because Maryland LCV is working very, very hard, but we can't do it without you. Please, you can use the QR codes at the bottom, put your phone up there, click on it, and that way you can sign up for action alerts. And we will keep you informed about our information, our Friday digests, or Wednesday digest in this case, that will be helpful and informative. You'll get more information from us when specific action needs to be taken on the pathway report is a good example, or on specific legislation. So sign up. We get your email and we'll keep you informed. You can tell us how often you want us to alert you as well. The other is make a donation. We definitely need support for this work, and we earn every dollar every year that we spend. And so any way you can make that a little bit easier on us, the better off. And another way you can make it easier on us and have some fun is to join us. October 5th is our big annual Changemaker event. And we have a great lineup, and we'll be enjoying talking with many folks there. It's a fun event. So please join us in Baltimore on October 5th. You can get more information on how to do each of those through the QR codes. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melanie and see if we can get to some of the questions that were asked.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And thank you so much for the presentation and for everyone for joining us today. I'm just going to read a couple questions that came in. Debbie Cohen had asked, what does the administration need to promote build out of local transmission capacity? So new green electricity generation and storage facilities can more quickly be connected to the grid. Yeah.
Oh, go. Yeah, great question, Debbie. And thank you for the previous email on that. It's really critical. The grid is, just so everybody understands, that's the wires, right? That's the way the electron gets from the generation point to the blender or the computer that you have plugged in. And that grid, the more we electrify things, which is the cleanest way, the cleanest energy sources is electrification, the better the grid has to be. So it's not only reliability, but it's also keeping it it's building the capacity. So both of those things are critical. We've seen, in Texas, they ran out of capacity a couple years ago, and you remember how that is, or the brownouts that occurred up in the New England states. So fortunately, unfortunately, Maryland is part of what's called the PJM system, which is I think it's a 12 or 13 state grid system. And so we're one state in that grid, and we need to keep the pressure on the PJM to look at renewables, adding renewables to the grid, and making sure that it's building out the capacity. It's going to be a long process, but the more diligent and the more aggressive we are about asking for it, the better off everybody's going to be. Fortunately, many states in this area, in the New England area, our mid-Atlantic areas are supporting this as well. So hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll see some progress on that.
All right, Kim. The next question is from Denise Davis. It's talking more about transit buses and not being identified as a high priority. Can you speak more to that and movement of making that more of a priority for social justice? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say it's a top priority. As we look at the transportation sector, one of the key elements to reducing pollution is to reduce the number of vehicles traveled, right? Vehicle miles traveled, VMT is what it's called. And one of the best ways to do that is to increase transit. So as I said, the governor putting forward a recommendation for a red line in Baltimore is going to help reduce vehicle miles traveled. And we, and a lot of our colleagues and partner groups have prioritized ensuring that highway expansion is not a solution and is not a pollution reduction solution. So fortunately, the Moore administration agrees with us on that. As I said, the electric school bus and electrifying transit are areas that we're hoping to see expanded by the administration. And I work closely with Maryland Department of Transportation, and they've issued some great insight and a report recently on transportation action. So I see this being a priority for sure in the state, and hopefully some changes will be coming up soon.
Great, thank you. The next question is from Sonia Demire, and she's talking about the RPS system as a core piece of getting to 100% clean energy in the Pathways report. and making sure that we're honest in the definitions of what clean and renewable is. Can you talk a little bit more about kind of cleaning up that whole definition and system?
Yes, great question. So just a little background, the RPS, the Renewable Portfolio Standard, was, I think, went into law in the 2009 maybe. And sorry, Kristen Harbison just was our political director commenting on this. The RPS defines by tiers, tier 1, 2, and 3, a source of energy and whether it's clean or not. Tier 1 is supposed to be the cleanest, tier 2 is next, and then tier 3. And then it goes on to say so much of our energy needs to come from tier 1 with an increasing amount. At the time when the RPS was originally put together, there were not clean energy sources put into tier 1 for a variety of reasons, some of them political. And over the years, we have tried to clean that up. So cleaning up the RPS is the jargon that we use to describe that effort. We will continue to try to ensure that incineration is not considered a clean source of energy, because it is not. And that's one we believe needs to be removed from the tier 1. What we do need to do, though, in terms of 100% clean energy, is get those renewable sources, offshore wind, geothermal, solar, much more part of our infrastructure. And that's what the 100% clean energy by 2035 would do. So you heard the governor say we're going to go from 2 gigawatts of offshore wind up to 8.5 gigawatts. The same kind of effort needs to be done for solar deployment. The RPS says we should have 14.5% of our energy coming from solar. We're kind of at 1% right now. We need a lot more aggressive effort on solar deployment. So those types of things are really critical to achieving the 100% clean energy, as well as cleaning up the RPS definitions.
All right, Kim, we had a couple of questions regarding the comments regarding the highway expansion and the Beltway expansion and tolls, also potentially light rail along the medians. Can you talk more to that and anything that you see kind of coming down the pipeline with that?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not as well versed on the current status of all that. So what I'd like to do is, just in this spirit of time, because I know we're running out, we'll get back to y'all with where it is exactly and what we can do, and what actions are coming down. I will say, generally speaking, the administration has slowed that way down. In fact, has derailed what the Hogan administration has put in front or put out there, and is trying to figure out how best to deal with the congestion and do it in an environmentally friendly way. But we'll get more specifics posted. So I believe we are out of time. And so with that, I want to thank you all for joining us, and keep in touch. We're all available to talk with you and answer any questions. We really enjoy engaging with you in this way. And I do want to thank Melanie for her work in coordinating this. She was fabulous, and welcome aboard, Melanie. It's great to have you part of the team. Wish you all the best, and we'll talk to you guys soon.